Okay, this is my Journalism 354 video with my friend Jose. He is an immigrant from Cuba, and I'm doing my interview project, subject proposal and recorded interview with him. And thank you so much for doing this interview. So we'll start out with the first question. What is your name?
My name is Jose David Fernandez Avila.
Where are you from?
I'm from Cuba.
What was life like in Cuba?
So life in Cuba, it was very different from here, in almost every single aspect, like culturally, linguistically, ethnically, everything. And yeah, in terms of resources, food, like water, shelter, everything, it's very different.
Mm-hmm. What is your favorite thing about Cuba?
Well, my favorite thing about Cuba, I would have to say that it is definitely the people and, to a certain degree, the way of life in terms of relationships, like with the community, with the people. It's just closer. It's just more more warm, more familiar. It's just closer in every single sense. Yeah.
What is your least favorite thing about Cuba?
Well, my least favorite thing about Cuba is the fact that we had a lot of lack of resources in terms of like food, medicine, basic necessities like shampoo, toothpaste, and yeah, there was just a lack of a lot of resources and food. Yeah.
Why did you leave Cuba?
Well, I left Cuba because I wanted to be reunited with my family. My father, he left Cuba when I was in primary school, so it was like when I was in elementary school. Then like he left and he was in the United States for about 5 years, and throughout that time I started to realize some of the things that were going wrong, or some of the things that were not as good in Cuba, in terms of like, just lack of resources, lack of food, and not just that. It was also like a political aspect of it, because there was a lack of political freedoms and certain freedoms in general. And I started to grow in opposition to the government as I realized those things, and that became conflictive in Cuba.
When was the last time you visited Cuba?
So I visited Cuba for the last time in 2022. I had to go back to Cuba, and I had to go through Canada. And I went to Cuba to see my grandmother. She wasn't feeling great, like she was a little sick. And I had to go see her. I had to go and take some medicine to her, give her some food, bring her some food from the US. And yeah, that was the last time I went to Cuba, in March of 2022.
Why did your family leave Cuba?
So my father, he first left Cuba because there was just an enormous lack of opportunities in Cuba, and he was also growing in discontent with the status quo in Cuba, with the situation in Cuba. He was just growing discontent. He saw no future for us or for himself, neither economically or like politically or in any other sense. There was just no good vision of the future for us, so that's why he left.
Is Cuban culture still a huge part of your life? If so, in what ways?
Yeah, sure. Cuban culture is still a big part of my life because that's something I'll never be able to take out of me, out of who I am, and out of what I am in general. It was an experience just like living my whole life in Cuba. It's just so entrenched in my life, and some of the ways that I do still engage and portray my Cuban culture is like mainly like with regards to the music, with regards to the usage of my language, and yeah, because at least here in Liberty or in Lynchburg, there is not that much engagement that I can have with other Cubans, and yeah, there's not that much that I can engage with my Cuban culture, but at least I try to keep some of the traditions with like some of the music that I listen, and then of course when I speak to my family, when I talk to them.
Where did you move to when you left Cuba?
When I left Cuba, I moved to Miami. It was a big difference in a lot of ways, but in other ways, there still remain somewhat of a connection because in Miami there's a lot of Cubans that live there, and it was also very nice not having the disruptive change going from Cuba to a totally different place. Miami felt like the best version of what Cuba could have been, and it was just so wonderful to live in that place and in that environment. But yeah, it was a very smooth transition because on one end I was able to still engage very actively with my Cuban culture, like living in Miami with other Cubans, but at the same time I was able to live a much better and plentiful life.
Well, that kind of answered a little bit of my next question, but I was just going to ask again, what was life like living in a new place and country?
Yeah, living in Miami, it was certainly a great change. I could not be more thankful for getting the chance to live in Miami. At first, the only bad thing that I saw about living in Miami was the fact that it became an impediment for me to learn English, because when I came, I barely knew any English. And living in Miami, talking and speaking Spanish the whole time, or pretty much the whole time, either to my family or even within the school, there were a lot of Cubans, Colombians, Venezuelans, and people from many other countries in Latin America, and it was a smooth transition, something better than I thought it would be. So they were very helpful, like in getting me to transition from Cuba to a new system of education, and it was good in that sense that it helped me transition. But then in another sense, it also became an impediment in my desire to learn English and in my desire to learn about the American culture, about like America a little bit more, because I really wanted to engage and become part of the new country that I was living at in the American society. Yeah.
Did you and your family feel welcomed?
Yes, we did. We did feel very, very welcome. I can't say how thankful I am for living here and then living in Miami. I just felt so welcome. I just felt so at home, so peaceful, so it was just so wonderful. Yeah.
Well, you already talked about how difficult it was to learn English, but could you get more into how challenging it was to learn English as a language from Spanish to English?
Yeah, at first it was very difficult in the sense that I knew a couple words here and there, but I really didn't know much. And although I had taken some classes in Cuba, some English classes, they were not like super in depth. But then when I got here, I had a Nicaraguan professor, and he taught me pretty much like the grammatical structure of the language. He told me like how to conjugate certain verbs, certain adverbs, and all that. And I was really putting an effort into trying to learn English as quick as possible. So I would stay pretty much every day at least 1 hour after school ended to just to learn the language better, and just to get that grammatical structure uh, in a better sense, right? And then the other thing was just engaging in daily life with other students that maybe their parents were immigrants as well, and they were perhaps the first or the second generation to be born here in America. And some of them spoke Spanish, some of them didn't, but the majority of them had troubles speaking Spanish. And yeah, it was just a little bit difficult sometimes to communicate with them, and sometimes to talk to them, because although they lived in Miami, and although maybe they could understand Spanish, they had a kind of a hard time speaking Spanish. So I had to deal with that, and some, I had a lot of Spanish speaking professors. I had a lot of Spanish speaking teachers in Miami, so that was very very good, very helpful. The counselors as well, the secretaries, like pretty much the majority of the school spoke Spanish, and that was good. That was good in my transition. But sometimes I did have some African American professors, and some professors that spoke very little to no Spanish, and that was also a challenge, because when I wanted to communicate with them, as soon as I got here, it became very difficult. I had to use a translator a lot. But then, as time went on and I started to pick up on the language, I started to understand it a little bit more, and then I started to speak a little better year by year, day by day. It was just a process. It took me about 4 years to really get a grasp of the language, and then when I went to college, it was really when I took another step in my development and my learning of the English language.
Awesome. Moving to a new country, did you feel you experienced any form of discrimination as an immigrant?
Since I went to Miami, and as I told you, and I'm just going to reiterate, Miami is just full of Hispanics, and particularly a lot of Cubans. So I didn't feel discriminated in that sense, but there were certainly very few times, and I can barely recall when maybe there was a couple times, or like 1 or 2 times, when I maybe talked to like a couple African Americans that they didn't know Spanish, and we didn't really understood. I didn't really understand at that time what they were saying, and I don't know, there was just not a good connection at that moment. But it was just something brief. It wasn't very big. I've actually never had any real or any bad moments of racism, at least that I have encountered. And I've traveled to a couple cities here in the U.S., and I've not felt discriminated in what I can recall.
What were some of the biggest challenges moving to a new country, other than learning the language and maybe just going to a new place. Were there any more new challenges that you didn't mention?
I would say that I started to realize some of the other challenges when I left Miami and came for college to New York and then here to Lynchburg. That it's not necessarily like a problem, but it's just something different that I had to deal with, and it was the American culture. You know, it's not like a bad thing, but it was just different. It was just like different in the manners and in the ways you guys interact with each other. Yeah.
You mentioned that you had a grandmother still in Cuba that you went to visit in 2022, but do you still have any more family in Cuba?
Yes, I like all of my grandparents are in Cuba. Uncles, everybody except my mother, my father, and my brother.
Do you still communicate with family back home?
Yes, I do. I still communicate with them. Not as often as I wish I could, but yes, I do still communicate with them.
That's awesome. Were you able to find a community of Cubans in your area?
In Miami, most certainly, yes. But over here in Virginia, it's a little bit more difficult because there's not as many as in Miami. But yes, I was able to find a pretty big Cuban community. Like pretty much anywhere in Miami, you could find a Cuban, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What was it like moving to a new school?
I mean, at first I gotta tell you, and I'm gonna be honest. At first, when I went to my high school in Miami, it was absolutely wonderful just to go to that school because for the first time, I was going to a school that had air conditioning, a school that had clean and working bathrooms, a school that had good food, like, and in good amounts. It was just wonderful, just great to be in that environment and just engaging with new technology. I was able to have a phone. I was able to see the touch screens that the professors had, the projectors. It was just an engagement with things that I had no idea that existed. And yeah, you just seeing the infrastructure of the school, it was great. Yeah.
What are the biggest differences you've seen from Cuba to where you and your family live now?
Yeah, the biggest difference. What is it? Like just in general terms, everything, like just having a car. I never even dreamed about having a car. That thought never crossed my mind. The fact that I could drive a car or that I could potentially own a car or a vehicle, it was just not in my mind. I just didn't think it was gonna be possible. And just the fact that I could have a car, that I could have a store that would be full of the products that I wanted whenever I wanted, like throughout the year and pretty much at any time of the day. And yeah, just going to a school that had amazing resources, that had a gym, an indoor gym. I had never seen an indoor gym before that, with air conditioning, with like clean infrastructure. Everything was just completely different in a general sense. Everything, absolutely everything. Highways, just almost every single thing, yeah.
All right, last two questions. Would you move back if you had the chance?
No, I don't think I would move back.
What are you doing with your life now in your new home?
Well, right now I'm here in college. I'm a government major, and I'm trying to go to law school after I graduate from my bachelor's here at Liberty.
All right. Thank you so much. It was really interesting hearing your story.
Of course.
And thank you so much for your time.
Of course, absolutely.
Thank you.